Namaste and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. Sat means truth, Logos means a study or science, Sattology means a science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means science of fake lie imagination or science of or study of fake lie imagination. Please understand that Sattology builds your identity, that means the truth builds your identity, and mythology destroys your identity. Today, I have very, very special guest coming after a long time and through a very prolonged, he was sick for a long time as well, medically, and he has joined today. So let us welcome Abhijit Iyer Mitra.
Well. Thanks for having me on.
After a long time, Abhijit, tell me the secret of the yellow first, and then we start off.
So, see, there's only two kinds of t-shirts I buy, right? Yellow and blue. And I don't know why, it's just always that what catches my eye is yellow and blue. It's psychosomatic or whatever reaction to these colors. I don't know, but yeah. So there's no significance behind it other than personal taste. Yeah.
So yellow is the favorite color of Hindus as well. I mean, it's used everywhere, like in spring, and most of the Hindu Vishnu and Durga are represented by yellow color. Now, coming to the question of this Hindu, you see what's happening in Bangladesh, and you
It's
speak.
also the Chinese imperial color. Like Rome and Western emperors and royalty used purple. Chinese emperors and Indian emperors also used yellow.
Yellow. Yeah, Mathanda Varma used to be in yellow, Pitambar, all the time.
Yeah.
So what is happening in Bangladesh, Hindus, and somehow again we are getting into the same rut. That there is a targeted killing of Hindus in Bangladesh, in Kashmir, and we are all silent. So what do you think is the main reason behind it, and why we are not able to stop it?
Look, there's a different reason as to why it's happening. There's a different reason as to why we're silent. And there's a different reason as to why we're not able to stop it. First is, why is it happening? Well, very simply, it's because the way in which Sheikh Hasina has neutralized Khalida Zia's opposition party. What's happened is the only opposition now to this government are the army and a whole bunch of Islamists. And the problem with the Islamists is that they have been growing worse and worse and worse day by day, because they feel that the army isn't upset with Sheikh Hasina at all, because she's doing very good work with the economy. She's not interfering in the military either. She's giving the military what she wants, because a better economy means a bigger defense budget, etc., etc. So there's nothing happening there. So they feel that the only way that they can take on this government without getting into economics and military issues is using Islam, which has been a classic case for a very long time. That's, how political Islam works in that sense. So they're doing it. Now, the thing is, a lot of my Bangladeshi friends have been predicting this ever since the Jamaat-e-Islami demanded that the Statue of Justice outside the Bangladesh High Court be removed. And the reason for that was because it was anthropomorphic, because, human figures are banned. And even though this was the Statue of Justice, the blind lady with the weighing scales, they wanted it banned. After they came for that, they came for Sheikh Hasina's own father, for Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's statues. Some of them were taken down, some of them were not. And obviously, it was going to be the next step. I mean, this has been predicted for the last 2-3 years that Hindus were going. I mean, there's always been low-level anti-Hindu violence happening out there. But it was only a matter of time before it blew up and it became so blatant. This has been number one. Number two is, why have we not been able to stop it? Because this essentially is the genius of the tactic, that if Sheikh Hasina tries to stop it, or the army tries to stop it, they then raise the slogan that Islam is in danger, and this lady and this army are trying to crush Islam essentially, and the tenets of Islam against idolatry, etc., etc., etc. So that in many ways ties her hands, where she can't really do much. On the other hand, if she doesn't do things, it affects investment, because nobody wants to invest in a country where you have mobs going around killing people, or vandalizing or destroying property. The third issue is, why aren't we talking about it? Well, very simple, because there is a international sort of this intersectional woke nexus between Islamists and wokes across the world. And this government in America and a lot of governments in Europe are essentially woke craziness masquerading around as governments in that sense. So they will not raise it because it doesn't suit their agenda. They're both equally intolerant. They're both iconoclastic. They both believe in lynch mobs and mass public violence as a means of. They don't believe in the state monopoly on violence anyway. Both of them. So when you have a media that's completely saturated by these types, you're not going to get much coverage. And in terms of, say, other media that could cover it, like, say, the right-wing media in America, Fox News, New York Post, and things like that, they won't, because they tend to be extremely insular. They're very America-focused. They don't have an internationalist point of view. And when they do, it's only restricted to Christianity here and there.
No, and the Indian government response has been very diplomatic only, and I think there is very little they can do. Right? People are expecting a lot from Indian government, but what can they do if they want to?
Look, this is partially. This is also the Indian government's fault in that sense. We should have been advising Sheikh Hasina to not get rid of Khalida Zia, because as long as Khalida Zia was around, you had an Islamist opposition split between Khalida Zia and the Jamaat-e-Islami. Now it's all coalesced into one, because, Bangladesh hasn't seen a coup in the last, 10, 12, 13 years now. So it's been an extremely stable government. And that's not working out in terms of minority rights in Bangladesh. Plus, given Sheikh Hasina, now Sheikh Hasina is extremely pro-India, and she's as pro-Hindu as you can be publicly in Bangladesh. And that, kind of limits your options. What are you going to do? You're taking the most pro-Hindu politician in Bangladesh. And are you going to pillory her for not doing something then? Then what are your options left? So see, it's both a lack of options, it's past tactical clumsiness coming home to haunt you.
No, one of the things which in her speech she said, and she said, I think this is the most radical thing I heard. She said, "You are born in this country. You are not a minority. You are the children of this soil." That's the speech she said. This is the best words I could see in this time. She said, "We don't believe in." Literally, she said, "We don't believe in minority and majority. You are all sons of the soil, and that is important for us." That's what she said.
Yep. So look, she's trying to play this as carefully as she can within the constraints, right? So what realistically can she do? I mean, she can crack down and then all hell will break loose for her. It'll actually end up becoming even worse in terms of, remember the last time when Pakistan cracked down in what was then East Pakistan, what is now Bangladesh, it was because of her father's, Bengali liberation. They thought that they could make this Islam versus Hinduism. And so they went on exclusively targeting Hindus. Well, almost exclusively targeting Hindus. This time, the Jamaat-e-Islami can play the same card out there. So, there are no real easy solutions out here on what to do. Unfortunately, that's the reality of it.
One of the things which astounds me, this Kashmiri target killings, and also the ex-chief minister, like whose father Mufti Muhammad and his daughter. Now they have been rabidly pro. They're not giving very vague statements to protect the Hindus. Again, we seem to be helpless. I mean, where are we lacking? Like, despite having the state machinery, we can't say much. What are the political compulsions which stop us from doing that?
So look, in the case of Kashmir, there are no political compulsions stopping us for doing squat. Okay, there were no political compulsions to release Mehbooba Mufti and her ilk from jail. Because remember, Mehbooba Mufti, the PDP, which is her party, is the face of a terrorist organization called the Lashkar-e-Toiba. Now, in terms, if you want to see this in terms understandable to Americans, it's like Sinn Féin and the IRA in Ireland. The Sinn Féin was the political wing, which was technically legal, and the IRA was the military faction, which was completely illegal and carrying out all the terrorist attacks. But the Sinn Féin would act as the spokesperson every time something happened in Northern Ireland or in England. Right. So if you remember when Lord Mountbatten was killed by a bomb, it was Sinn Féin that was coming out and supporting the action, saying, "Oh, this is oppressors. It was an act of we're in a state of war, so this doesn't count as terrorism, etc., etc." Things like that. So the PDP is like that, except it's got three parts. One is the Lashkar-e-Toiba, which is the Pakistan-based terror wing. The second is the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is the intellectual radicalization wing. So in terms of Israel, that would be like Sheikh Yassin for Hamas. That crippled old man who was one of the most evil people around till Israel quite wonderfully killed him off, as he should have been much earlier. Everybody would say, why did Israel kill him? He was a poor old man. He was a cripple in a wheelchair. Remember, you may be a cripple in a wheelchair, but your mind can be evil as hell. Right? Hitler had a severe flatulence problem and gas problems, which is why he was vegetarian. So, you can't end up saying, but look at him, he was a vegetarian. He enacted the first animal rights legislation in the world. How could you believe he ever did things like the Holocaust? There's no comparison to that. So what Sheikh Yassin was to Hamas, the Jamaat-e-Islami, this is it's the same concept, but it's the same Jamaat-e-Islami we're talking about in Bangladesh, but different leadership, slightly different concepts and things like that in Kashmir, who are the intellectual philosophical core. And the PDP is the political wing. Right? So this was things that had to be controlled beforehand, and the PDP would have evaporated if you had deconflicted the economy. The problem with the Indian mind is we think of first order effects, we never think of second and third order effects. So you think that just because you've thrown somebody in jail, everything is fine, nothing's going to happen, or just because you've released her and then held an election, you think she's been completely sidelined. That's not the way things work. Because remember, India is a third world country, and one of the signs of a third world country is extremely low human capital and your inability to apply deep thinking or a system of system solutions to any problem.
The Hindus, I was reading many different statements, and they're claiming that we are a very peace-loving community. They have not attacked anyone, and they're trying to appeal to the Muslims that why are you attacking us? Again, surprise and disbelief that they were attacked. No, this is a disbelief which astounds me completely. History is you have a history full of records where we have been attacked or community has been attacked, even everywhere in the world, wherever we are. Still, we are disbelief. What do you call this weakness? What is happening here?
Well, look, I mean, even ISKCON, I'm surprised ISKCON didn't know about it, because we've all been saying it's going to happen. I know I've spoken to people in ISKCON in Bangladesh in the past, about 2 years or so back, before COVID hit, where we were saying, you guys need to be careful. This is imminent, etc., etc. So they definitely knew something. I mean, there were individuals out there that I personally spoken to who knew something like this was going to happen. I don't know why we sort of think. I don't know why we react post facto. This is something we should have made our analyses public long back, as in our governmental analyses. People like me don't count, but the government should have said, these things are going to happen. This is what they're going to use it for. If you name and shame them before they do it, it becomes very easy to delegitimize them. So you keep saying, look, Jamaat-e-Islami, they are first attacking the Statue of Justice, then they're attacking my father, next they're going to attack Hindus. And they're doing this because we can't attack Islam. We need to come aside and say, we're going to do progressive Islam. These people don't represent Islam. They're un-Islamic. Get people to pass fatwas against them, government-controlled clerics to pass fatwas against them, etc., etc., etc. That's one thing. The second thing is focusing on the rule of law. But again, remember, the problem with third world countries is you don't have money to invest in law and order. America has a different problem because of guns, etc., etc. The state can't acquire a monopoly on violence. But a state monopoly on violence is one of the most beneficial things against mob violence, period.
You correctly highlight the problems of the third world systemic issues we have, and the first world also is now beginning to see that, like the Seattle riots we saw big time, and
Mhm.
we see in the US also, and people, Hindus are practically not heard of, like Hindus may be very prominent financially in some ways, not a lot, but still they are not being heard. There are almost 300,000 Bangladeshi Hindus in North America, almost 300,000. And they are, because they get a arrival on green card, they get green card in 6 months,
So,
usually.
so see, the issue with Hindus generally is three things. Number one, it's the general assimilationist tendency of Hindus that, we get absorbed into wherever we go. Number one. Number two, we have a severe inferiority complex, so we want to blend in, which is different from assimilationism. Uh, but it's that inferiority complex thing that, we don't want to rock a boat. We don't want to talk about these things. We just want to go about our business, keep our heads down, and mind our own business thing. You don't care if your neighbor's house is being burnt as long. I mean, you've seen this in India, right? So many people in India, they'll keep their houses clean, and their idea of keeping their house clean is to take their dog and cat shit and throw it across the wall into their neighbor's property, right? Or to keep have flushing toilets in their house, but the flushing toilet leads to a public drain outside where it's just open drain that it will go into. So it'll be stinking outside the house, but they don't care as long as they've got high walls to keep the stench away or whatever, right? So this is number two. Number three, with the Bangladeshi Hindus, is the more prominent they get on these things, the more their families back home get threatened. So with the Bangladeshi Hindus, there is definitely a reason for them not to raise their voice. But for other Hindus to not raise their voice, well, what can I say?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is enough for this topic, because this is a very sad topic and it is burning everybody's heart today in the US. And there's a big protest, huge protest happening in DC today on the Bangladeshi violence. I don't think so American government will put any sanctions whatsoever, because like you said, they don't care. It, as long as it's a Christian interest not hurt, they don't care, literally. Coming to the American politics, we all know that the Joe Biden's popularity is sinking day by day, and but I don't think so they are going to ever lose, or next election, midterms, or as well as the long 2024. What is your view on that?
Well, look, I mean, I've never been a big fan of Biden, and I've been deeply worried about ever since Obama took over, I've been deeply worried about the direction that the Democrat Party has been going in, right? I mean, you had all the grime and slime, which was common to both Republicans and Democrats with Bush and Clinton and all of that. But since Obama, this whole thing about critical race theory, identity politics, et cetera, it's been getting more and more and more worrying. And the issue is, it doesn't matter once you make politics about identity. It doesn't matter how bad you are. It is the same politicians who will keep getting elected. So essentially what's happening is, you being a first world industrialized country was meant to reduce the resource crunch. And reducing the resource crunch meant that identity as a marker of social protection would get reduced. That's not happening in America. So what you've been seeing is that the more identity, it's symbiotic. The more identity becomes important, the less policies become important. And this is why you're seeing a huge migration out of California of all the big companies moving to Texas or some other places. The problem, of course, there is they're all going to move to Texas and turn Texas blue and turn Texas into a CRT hellhole and things like that, into a ethnic and identitarian hellhole. And, when I see this happening, you remember about when we started this program about 2-3 years back, I went on insisting It's not China that will destroy America, it's America that will destroy America. Will Durant used to say, a great civilization doesn't destroy itself from without till it has been, doesn't get destroyed from without till it has destroyed itself from within. So it's America that's going to destroy America. And the more identity politics you have, the less accountability you will have, the less auditing of policy you will have, the less focus on policy you'll have. And I think the only country that's managed to avoid that is France, which is cracking down on all this nonsense very, very stridently, which is surprising because remember, all this nonsense started off in France.
Exactly.
It was the Soistad and notorious child molesters and like Derrida and Foucault and all those sick, dirty little perverts who were vicious child rapists in their own right.
That's right.
Who would justify their child rape through intellectualizing it or philosophizing it and things like that. That started all this crap off, and they exported it to America. But what does it tell you that America has today run on shit that the French excreted 40, 50 years back, but want to have nothing to do with it anymore?
Classical liberalism. That's what Democrats have found.
Well, I mean, look, so that's the problem. The Democrats have essentially become coprophiles. They're feeding on the excrement of the intellectual excrement of another country, which realized that these people were in fact excrement to be thrown across the Atlantic on the other side and not brought back in any way.
France has taken many correct steps, actually. And you're absolutely right. I was laughing because the left and the right also originated in the French Revolution.
Exactly.
So in the case, the reports which I'm getting, and you can verify it, there are a lot of empty, large Chinese cargo vessels stuck in Panama. And it is a huge chain. And some people say it's a confirmed report that most of the vessels are empty. There's no containers. And it is causing a backlog, which is causing high inflation. The US clocked 5.5% inflation in last month, so September. And
so remember, this isn't a new problem. I don't know why it's being highlighted today, but the general thing was that a lot of tankers, a lot of transport ships would go from China to America carrying things that all ship captains like: electronics, cars, etc., 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 which keep your ship clean. They don't need anything. They're high value products, etc. The problem was they almost always used to return empty because no ship captain wants to load up his boat with coal, which then requires months to clean out the ship and make it fit to take cars or sensitive electronics and things like that. This is a problem we've known about for a very, very long time. But I don't exactly understand why it's coming home to roost right now. Of course, the inflation also has to be traced to other things, which is the unsustainability of American credit, the unsustainability of American cities, the urban sprawl. I don't think Americans realize this, but this sort of urban sprawl where all your Walmart, and they're not destinations. Like, when you go to, say, London and you go to Harrods is a destination in itself. You go to some streets for cheese. You walk the streets. These are walkable cities. You enjoy walking in there. But they don't realize that urban sprawl comes at ever-reducing tax benefits when the cost of upkeep are factored in over 15 to 20 years. So there's a whole load of urban sprawl-induced debt. There's a whole load of consumer spending-induced debt. It's a whole load of things coming home to roost, not to mention some of the inflation that you're seeing on meat, for example. I think when California introduced that rule that pigs would have to have, I think, 2 or 3 square feet more area per, which isn't much, but it's a lot in terms of what bacon manufacturers or ham manufacturers have to think about. These things were bound to start adding up. It's been a lot of small things, well, not small, some of them are big things as well, all adding up. It's multi-causal. You'd think that the way of circumventing this is to go towards lab grown meat, which would anyway reduce animal cruelty and things like that. They're not moving towards it fast enough. But what they are moving towards is, say, electric vehicles, even though I think a lot of the electric vehicle valuation in the market today is complete fraud. Take Lucid, for example. Lucid, which is a high end Tesla, I guess, hasn't produced a single car. They've got a lot of renders, but they're valued at what, $80 billion? And you're
That's
sitting
right.
there thinking, how the hell are you valued at that when you haven't produced a single
Right.
goddamn proof of concept? Right? So there's a severe overvaluation happening. Tesla, most of its valuation doesn't actually come from the cars it manufactures. It comes from the carbon credits and all the this thing you get for an electric car. And if you remember, electric cars were banned in Singapore because electric cars, what they do is they don't actually reduce pollution. They only reduce emission at the point of transportation.
That's right.
Consume more of that energy than an internal combustion engine would. This is why Singapore banned Tesla. You know, the first Singaporean owner of Tesla was fined something like $2-3 million or something like that. Why? Because they found that a Tesla was consuming 11 times more uh, coal power than a normal car would in terms of diesel or petrol fuel. So, you know, we get caught up in these narrative traps where we're not able to analyze policy and their impact, or you're paid not to analyze policy and its impact seriously.
And also the post expenditure, like the post of recycling a battery is very high. It's very like the environmentally very unfriendly, because the lithium batteries cannot be disposed easily under the earth or in the
So,
water.
so there are things that are happening out there. There's post-lithium batteries on the horizon. There's a company called Sono in Germany that's producing solar-powered cars, which can give you about 21 miles of range on a photovoltaic cells built into its body. You know, Tata's in India Ambani's in India are working on hydrogen, which is probably much more eco-friendly. It wasn't, because the production of hydrogen was a very eco-unfriendly process. But I think last year, it was a French company, I think, or a Norwegian company that cracked the whole eco-friendly hydrogen production process, which I think holds a lot of market value. Then there's the Tatas working on a French technology called MDI in India, which is essentially air propelled. You don't put fuel into it, it sucks air up. So, but Tata tells me they've stopped work on it because they couldn't actually translate it into a commercial product, given all the safety requirements and the weights of those safety requirements and things like that. But, you know, there are things. The issue is that it's become such dogma today that you have to go electric without looking at all the other things that would reduce. For example, nuclear power. Everybody thinks nuclear power is dirty. Uh,
It's the cleanest
it's
one.
real. It's a lot cleaner than anything else we have.
That's
You know,
right.
it's like what Winston Churchill used to say about democracy. It's the absolute worst system we have, except that it's better than everything else we have. So, you know, it's like that. Nuclear power is not terribly clean, but it's better than most other things you have. You know, and you want to focus on crap like wind. Now, solar is actually quite eco-friendly and clean, but wind, you know, there's lots of things to prove that it actually isn't. So, you know, we get bogged down in dogma.
That's right. That's right. We get bogged down in dogma. Coming to the US politics again, conservatives. Now, conservatives have their own favorite channel. You know what it is, and others also know. And this is a question by the students actually. Conservatives, they have their own philosophy, not very popular in the campus, but they are popular outside. It seems that once a child passes out of the university and then he works for 10 years, after that he becomes a conservative. So it's a very experienced choice to being a conservative. But we also see from the other side is that conservatism is almost like pro British colonialism, very pro British, anti native. Do you agree with that? sometimes.
So, look, I think we need to look at the way things are split today. What you're looking at, I won't even call them conservatives. What you've seen is a coalescing of the old traditional left that believed identity was a bad thing with the conservative right. And you've had the sort of soft conservatives and a large part of the unentrenched lynch mob left that have coalesced together. So the right, what you call the conservatives today, is actually a very curious combination of what used to be principled left once upon a time and conservatives. And, this pro-British, pro-colonial thing, remember, for a very long time, if you go by statistics, you will see that colonialism is probably, at least in India's case, India grew at a higher percentage under the British than it ever did under the Mughals and the Delhi Sultanates before that. And even the, de-urbanized late period of Hindu rule from, say, the 600s to the 1100s. So I don't know why we go after the British as much as we do. Of course, there were some colonial rules like, say, Belgian Congo, which were truly horrific. But don't forget the kind of violence that used to happen in sub-Saharan Africa before the white man stepped there was no less horrific. Remember, I mean, I know Americans love to glorify Shaka Zulu and all of that, there was even a South African serial made about it by the apartheid regime. But remember, Shaka Zulu was absolutely genocidal. Shaka killed more black people than the apartheid regime ever did in its entire existence. So, the problem is it's become so, you can't say these things. It's wrong. Why is it wrong to say that? In Hinduism, you have this principle called Purva Paksha, where every time you think you've found the answer, you have to find somebody who disagrees with you, sit down and have an intellectual discussion with them. You've never achieved the end goal in Hinduism. It is constant exploration where you sit, do Purva Paksha, which is somebody with an opposite point of view, where you're constantly discussing, constantly refining your arguments, etc., 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 till you find realization. And yet what we find today is essentially a thought Gestapo that tells you what are thinkable thoughts, what are sayable sayings, what are believable beliefs, while not willing to examine any opposite point of view. And for me, that is extraordinarily corrosive and dangerous.
So Angus Madison's report says that after the British left, was -4%, and the growth, and during the Mughal era it had reduced down to 26%.
Remember, in the Mughal era, almost 70% of India's GDP, if you look per capita, you'll see it was very high.
Very high.
But the problem is the Gini, nobody's looking at the Gini coefficient, because the Gini coefficient in India was obscene. It was 665 families controlled 70% of India's GDP. Right. And by this time, remember, by the 1400s, by the late 1400s, early 1500s, everyone had overtaken India. Everyone in Europe had already overtaken India to the tune of 2 to 3 times GDP. Italy was the highest. Then I think it was Holland and France, Britain, and then France, etc. Because France suffered terribly during the 1400s. The 1300s, really. But 1400s were a period of kind of recovery. They were already ahead of us. They were already technologically, intellectually, in terms of human living standards, way, way ahead of India and China at that point of time. So, there's also this aspect that you need to look at out here, that how much of history is sort of contrived into a useful idiot for public consumption.
Now, coming back to this colonial thing, my last book came out, Gold, Glory, and God. You touched a good point there. Most of the Indian conquest started with weapons and military.
Hmm,
The entire world conquest, not just India.
hmm,
So I've written about Southeast Asia, Dutch. There's a pattern they followed. The first Dutch will come, then Portuguese, then after that French, then Italians, and then after that last will be the British. But British would outsmart everyone, and so this was the case. And Babur was the first one to use machine guns in India, like the automated guns in India. Now this is a record that is a recorded history. Now
not
the
machine guns, cannon.
uh, cannons, but they were automated guns he got from Turkey.
No. There were no automated guns at that time. It was cannon.
Uh,
He was the first person to. The Lodhis didn't have cannon, so he was the first person to bring about the cannon into India.
so yeah, whether it's a cannon, but they brought a mechanized guns from Europe, Byzantine Empire. Turkey was fighting the Byzantines, and they got it in India. Now the point is the colonial mindset of subjugating others on trade using military has always been Europe's strategy, and it is being replayed again continuous because now again the West is declining economically, and again they are playing the same game again. Do you think this time is going to succeed?
Look, I don't agree with this interpretation. Colonialism did a heck of a lot of bad, but it also did a heck of a lot of good. All right. You look at the four earliest tiger economies in Asia, which were Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan. The reason that they exploded as rapidly as they did was because they were, and this is not an argument I make, this is an argument that Noam Chomsky makes, because they were colonized and forcibly industrialized by the Japanese. And that is what led to their rapid industrialization, amongst other things. Uh, Basically, what the Japanese did was to sit and open schools because an industrial workforce fundamentally has to be an educated workforce. So is that automatic? It wasn't done for altruistic purposes. They were extremely brutal. They were extremely nasty. But for purely selfish purposes, they educated the entire population. Right. So it was a very sort of it was a nasty period that had great, wonderful consequences for the countries later on, even though it was genuinely horrific. So, there's many ways of looking at colonialism. French colonialism in Africa, for example, yielded nothing uh, because it was completely extractive. British colonialism in India, even though it was extractive, still yielded quite a bit, because if you're growing at a better rate than you were for the 1,000 years past, that's not a bad thing per se. Number two, this whole thing, I remember from the Bengali side of my family, the Battle of Plassey and the British rule that consolidated British rule in India. We actually used to see the British as liberators from Muslim rule, because the man that they defeated and killed, Siraj-ud-Dawla, the Sultan of Bengal, he was a genuinely horrible, nasty, lunatic, jihadi bigot. So, you look at the oral traditions and the memories of our forefathers. For them, British rule was actually, it significantly reduced the capriciousness and the day-to-day violence of what they had experienced in the era before British rule. Right? Yeah, so it's a whole set of things. Remember, it's never. There's always another side to the story. Nothing is ever monochrome. It's all things, good, evil, and I think this is the fundamental lesson of Hinduism. You learn there is no such thing as black and white. It's only 50 shades of gray.
That's right.
And it's very important we understand these 50 shades of gray and never fall to dogma.
The India and China conflict is brewing on the borders, and it's come back. And all of us were the opinion that Kailash ranges should never be vacated. You said it. Many other people said it. And again, and also India has done some good steps in privatizing or corporatizing the PSUs, defense PSUs, breaking up OFB. What is your view on that?
Look, this OFB thing is complete nonsense because this government doesn't know economics. They know a lot of things. They're very good at socialism and wealth distribution. They absolutely suck at wealth creation. Because look, you've taken existing government companies that weren't performing, and you think that a mere restructuring under the same incompetent single exam pass bureaucrats will somehow suddenly make them profitable. I think you need your head checked. They should have done with all these defense military companies what they did with Air India, which was to privatize it. They won't do it because, see, there's too much in terms of corruption and bribery and interest groups within the bureaucracy to prevent that from ever happening. The same way that the bureaucracy tried to torpedo Margaret Thatcher's privatization plans. So it's, well, I mean, it's not going anywhere. And in terms of China, it's fine. Like I keep saying, we're completely okay to fight a short war with China. The problem is, if anything goes very long, it's the same reason the North won against the South in the US Civil War. The North was industrial, the South was not. So ultimately, industry talks. Ultimately, why did America and Britain all win again, and Russia all win against Germany and Japan? It's because the Germans couldn't bomb the east of the Urals where all the industrialization had been shifted. They couldn't bomb America, which is where all the industrial might was coming from. They couldn't cross the English Channel and effectively bomb Britain. So, it was, valor and intelligence are not a substitute for industrial might.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Abhijit, for coming, and thank you all the viewers for watching. And a lot of comments, and believe me, when my questions keep changing because people are asking live questions. So thank you all very much for joining, Abhijit. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.